This week, we are covering an article that's in SHRM, on SHRM.org, by Stephen Miller, and it's entitled Inflation Continues to Surge, Affecting Wage and Benefit Planning. So, Summer, what are some of the things that you gleaned from this article here that people should know?
Well, first, I must say that this article sparked me going down about a 2-hour rabbit hole, but in a good way. It had me looking at really just trying to understand, the Fed's raising the interest rate, and not only the impact, that it has on the economy as a whole, but just understanding, kind of revisiting, some of like high school economics and really just trying to understand inflation on a deeper level. But where that took me, Joey, was actually in a direction that I didn't anticipate. And that was really making the connection between when the Fed raises interest rates, how that impacts not just small businesses like in the way that we think about in terms of economics, but how it impacts jobs, the unemployment rate, and things that we all know as kind of like the HR issues. So I kind of had this big moment of realization about like, oh my gosh, like we need to talk about something on the show to really call attention to how not only the Fed raising the interest rates, but the inflation and how that is going to continue to impact businesses, and really get these conversations going so that people leaders and those also in the HR space are really, really paying attention to this now if they aren't already. And I think talking about some of the key things that companies are doing, and if they're not doing that, they're going to want to be thinking about.
Agreed. This is something that, there are all of these subjects that in school, you're like, man, this is so important. And then when you become an adult, you realize, do I really need to calculate the length of shapes and angles? But
Right.
This is one that is super important, economics. And so for the employer, or for the people manager that's listening to this show, this is where folks leave out the back door. It's, oh my goodness, gas prices are too high. I have to commute into the office. If I have to commute into the office, I have to go to another employer that's going to either allow me to work remotely or telework, or give me a higher salary, or, whatever the case may be, education or groceries, or however your team is feeling impacted by the rise in pricing. This is where they slip out of the back door, and they may not even tell you that they're leaving because of compensation or because of benefits, but they are. But they are. I don't have a poll in front of me, but I'd argue that that's one of the reasons they're leaving. So it's really important to understand, as a small business owner and a people manager, how outside forces impact your P&L. And the levers that you need to pull to successfully keep those things at bay. And I want to give a shout out to Michael Bush's Udemy course. He has a course on Udemy about kind of like the principles of running a small business. He talks about P&L and its relationship to human capital. So maybe we'll drop a link to that in the show notes. But I'm talking way too much. But the short of it is, economics matter. Global economics, local economics. The cost of a cup of coffee in your neighborhood is connected to so many different things, and as an employer, you have to pay attention to that.
Right. And to add to that, Joey, I just kind of wanted to break it down in like some of the simplest terms for some of our listeners to understand. And so to first lay the foundation, the Consumer Price Index rose 7.9% year over year in February. And just to put that into perspective, that's actually the greatest that it has increased in more than 40 years. And with that higher inflation, the simplest way to think about it is that your workers are able to buy less. And when you factor that into, what's considered real inflation, like how is that impacting the money that they're taking home? Like, how does that impact their earnings? Like, with that level of inflation, it's actually making their earnings fall 2.6%. And so even if you're giving them increases, and what we've seen typically are increases in like the 3% range on average, even with those, their earnings are falling, and that's the real problem here.
Yeah, it's that working twice as hard and compensation, stretching twice as short.
Right.
Which is crazy. And I just got I set up Google alerts for our company name, and Jumpstart's a pretty popular word, but I got a Google alert in for a career at the gas station, of all places, and it says Jumpstart your career at this gas station, and their starting wage now is $17 an hour. And when you think about inflation and companies improving their compensation to attract the right talent, you have to look at the fact that rates are rising all around you. I mean, in my neck of the woods, Target is increasing its base salary. Best Buy is increasing its base salary. Amazon has said professional workers, their base salary is like tripling or doubling. All of that plays into why you need to tackle your compensation and help with, I think the article mentioned, was helping with rising healthcare costs. But also, if you are limited in what you can do financially, lean into what you can do from an employer brand perspective and a workplace culture perspective, because in many instances, it isn't always about the money, but it is about people wanting to be at a place where they feel they're contributing, their organization is adding value to the world, and what they do matters, and they feel like they belong at your business. So all that is important to take into account.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, Joey, because this article specifically does talk about some of the things that companies can do to help offset that inflation, and they do all have some sort of expense to the company. And one of those is companies are looking at doing quarterly pay raises, and that's just to try to keep up with how fast some of the salaries are increasing. Now, I know that's not practical for everybody, but if you are a small business that is in the position to increase pay, then that's definitely something to consider for the short term. And as I mentioned earlier, we're typically seeing around 3% increases on average historically, but salary budgets right now for many of these companies that are trying to keep up or slightly lead, those increases are in the 4 and 5% range, which is significantly more than what we've seen before. In terms of benefits, in this article, they referenced that there was a survey that 65% of workers actually said they'd consider leaving their job for a more generous 401k, and some companies are making some significant changes there, whether it's offering a larger match or in some cases offering a contribution with no employee participation requirement. So lots of things happening that companies are doing in this space to help their employees like combat inflation. And I think with the Fed expected to have a number of small increases, in the future, I think that companies really need to be paying attention to this now.
So, Sommer, this is what I love about what we get to do, right? Because we are transitioning into spring, and so a lot of people think of like spring cleaning. So I can just think of a few things that you, as the small business owner, you as the people manager should be spring cleaning with regard to inflation and how it's impacting your business. I mean, everything from, we've mentioned compensation, we've mentioned benefits packages or benefit strategy, maybe even getting in a stay interviews for your team of just say, hey, how are you enjoying your experience here? What would you want to change? All that sort of feedback is interesting. But what are some other things that you think people could be spring cleaning at this time of year to help fight off some of those negative implications of inflation?
Well, I think one of the things that comes to mind for me as we, start to make progress on, many locations reopening as, kind of the state of COVID is improving. I think that for companies that have the opportunity to finally get together when they haven't been able to for so long, that this would be a great opportunity to bring your team together, do some team building events, look to deepen those relationships and have those conversations about how are you doing? How are your employees doing? And what is it that the company might be able to do in order to make their employee experience better? So I feel like, if companies have the opportunity to get together and actually have those conversations and deepen those relationships in person, to me, that's a great thing to do regardless. But as we approach spring and the opportunity to get together becomes more of a reality, that'd definitely be high on my list.
Yeah. That's a great point. That's a great point. Having those conversations, getting people talking, because if you have a culture that does encourage those conversations, you're well on your way. And don't have a culture that encourages those conversations, that's a sign that you may want to start right there to get to that point.